Ready? First, let me thank Martha and Jim for putting together an impromptu talk about their very adventurous adventures. I'm sure we'll have a lot to think about there. It's a great pleasure of mine to introduce our next speaker. It sort of embodies my Benedict Arnold moment to be introducing someone who is now a colleague of mine at the Roy Rosenzweig Center for History and New Media at George Mason University. I've known Amanda, 3-4 years now? A good long while. And I'm always delighted to have the chance to talk to her and get her insights about new technologies and how they are influencing scholarship and libraries especially, and her insights into singing and songwriting, which is a wonderful additional talent of hers. She is currently the That Camp coordinator. For those of you who haven't heard of it, That Camp stands for the Humanities and Technology Camp, or yes. And the spirit of That Camp is very much in line with the spirit of what we're doing here. We are exploring, we are trying things out because we just have wonderful ideas and we want to get them done. Amanda has done that wonderfully. She has also contributed to Alt-Ac volumes, Alt-Ac meaning alternate academic tracks. Again, let's do something different and just see what happens. So this is the spirit that Amanda is bringing to us in her talk, The Ivy and the Kudzu. Amanda French, thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm here to talk to you today about fear, peril, one of the words in my title. I feel like I spend a lot of time combating fear as somebody who works with technology a great deal, and as somebody who supports That Camp, which I'll talk about in more detail later. That Camp can inspire a good bit of fear in people, being spontaneous and impromptu as it is. And so it's unusual for me to get up and admit to having fears, and to really explore the various kinds of fears I have about things I ordinarily celebrate. So I don't want to be too much of a downer, but I did want to take the opportunity to talk about a specific issue, which is putting things online on the open web, which is something that I ordinarily encourage people to do, teach people to do with various tools, and am highly, highly in favor of. What I'm going to do is talk specifically about research online, a little bit about teaching, but mostly about research, and talk about, as I often do, why that's a good thing, why we should do that. We've just heard an amazing account of what can happen when a course happens online for free on the open web. When I'm talking about openness in academia, that's really what I'm talking about. I'm putting things online, not behind a paywall, but in a space where everybody can participate. The last thing I want to do would be to say that DS 106 should inspire fear in everybody, because I think that we all feel inspired by that. Nevertheless, there's a particular image that I think of when I think about the academy on the one hand and the web on the other. And this actually comes from Dan Cohen, who's the director of the Center for History and New Media, the Roy Rosenzweig Center for History and New Media. One day, Dan twittered, "I could use some help naming my book." His book is currently titled The Ivory Tower and the Open Web, and it's very much about the ways in which he thinks the Academy can benefit from certain kinds of innovation that happen on the web. But people were suggesting various titles before he settled on that one, and the one that I suggested was The Ivy and the Kudzu. We're getting into metaphor and metonym there. Ivy obviously representing the university, the ivy-covered walls, and the kudzu representing the web. Now we have here a picture of a building at the University of Chicago. It is an ivy-covered building. And what you can see about the ivy is that it's been trimmed. The windows are clear. They have been cleared of ivy. The ivy has been trained to be decorative on the building. And to me, this very much represents the way information, knowledge, content, whatever you want to call it, has traditionally been thought of in the academy as something to be trained, trimmed, pruned. The university supports that information. It grows that, on its very self. That is what, in a way, the university is for. This is a platform for Ivy understood as information. The web, on the other hand, is all about uncontrolled information. Information that is not described by experts, the way librarians describe books for library catalogs. It's all about information that threatens to overwhelm us in its profusion. And it's very much, we don't know what building is under here, but it's probably just a house, but it could conceivably be a university building. There is a chimney. Even the power lines are being covered with kudzu in this picture. And I think that there are a number of reasons, despite my love for the web and despite my feeling that this unbridled explosion of information is, on balance, an overwhelmingly positive thing. I still think that there are reasons to be a little bit afraid of being smothered by a great deal of uncontrolled information. So on the general topic of fear, before I get into specifics about different kinds of projects on the open web, brace yourself, this is rather frightening. Well, it's not really. This is a still from The Perils of Pauline, a 1914 film, very, quite famous. You can see Pauline up there in the covered wagon. This gentleman here, I'm not sure who he is, but he is probably her guide or her compatriot in some way. And you can tell that they are being overwhelmed by savages. This, to me, I think there are a couple of different kinds of fear that I want to talk about. As I mentioned, I spend a lot of time combating fear about technology, fear about the web. And to me, some of the fears that people have about putting content on the open web are this kind of fear for me. They're things that aren't really things we ought to be afraid of. You can see how, this is so dramatized and melodramatic. There's a certain enjoyment of the fear that's going on here. And moreover, to get a little more sophisticated about it, there's a political dimension to this picture, right? Anybody with 2 seconds of humanities training can see what's going on here in terms of race, in terms of, ideals of whiteness and of femininity. This is not a politically correct picture by any means. And I think that in many cases, people's fear about the open web and the uncontrolled nature of that is precisely this kind of faux fear, and also a fear that is engendered by attitudes that we would not want to propagate. Let's put it that way. So as I say, that's a lot of the fear that I spend my time combating. You can use technology, is my usual message. It's not that frightening. You should learn to use it. It's not that bad. This image, however, I find genuinely frightening. I accidentally, this is from The Ring, which I ordinarily don't watch horror movies at all. And once I went over to a friend's house and I accidentally watched The Ring. And I had they were watching it, and I literally had nightmares for 2 weeks afterward. And, but I wanted to show this. Some people may not find this, a particularly frightening image. I can barely watch it, I have to say, even still. But I wanted to show this to indicate that even though there are a great many fears about the open web and about putting higher education content on the open web that I think are archaic and not scary, like that Perils of Pauline picture, there are some that I think are legitimate and genuine. And in fact, one of the greatest fears that I have about the open web, higher education content on the open web, came up recently at Great Lakes That Camp. I would say one of the greatest fears that I have about that has been my own rhetoric lately, a rhetoric that is exclusively positive, depending on what audience I'm talking to. And I'll talk a little bit about that more. That's one of my genuine fears, is that because when things are entirely open, when things are recorded, when things are Twittered, the awareness that everything is public can lead to a discourse that is more positive. Now, how is that a bad thing? It may not be a bad thing. I'm going to talk a little bit about open peer review. One of the things, that has been proven over and over again is that when people have to sign their names to things, when people have to take responsibility for things in public, the discourse becomes more courteous. A little bit of the fear that I have is that my own discourse is becoming too courteous, too positive, particularly depending on the audience I'm talking to. Oh, gosh. This is Lego The Ring, which is not nearly as scary and which makes me feel much better. And I wanted to put this up here, also to say that I don't intend, if I can help it, to end on a negative note about the many things I'm going to discuss about the positives and negatives of putting higher education content on the open web. But I did want to talk about it as a strategy for dealing with certain fears, the more legitimate types of fears. And that's to laugh at them. And that's to take them seriously and transform them in creative ways, to parody them, as it were. Because it may be the case that some of those fears are not as real. Some of those fears may be Perils of Pauline, and we just don't quite know it. And then the other thing I wanted to say is that the only way to address certain of the legitimate fears that I'm having, I think, is to express them, express and reconfigure them. When I, in fact, had the traumatic experience of accidentally seeing The Ring, I found myself needing to watch it again. And watching it again actually did help stop the nightmares. And I had to watch it like this, and I had to do a lot of backing and forthing. And I had to, at some point I did actually manage to see the sort of crazy dead bodies that were created by the video that when you watch it kills you. Tremendous medium metaphor. And once I was able to look at them, I thought, wow, that really doesn't look all that real. That's kind of fake. Now that I've managed to look at it, it's not that real. So my hope is that, some of the fears that I'm going to express today and talk about are hopefully manageable in that way, by addressing them, confronting them, treating them creatively. I'm actually now going to move to the open web to talk about some of the things that are out there on the open web. And, again, trying a new thing for me, trying to be balanced about it. Hey, what's positive? Hey, what's negative about this? What are some of the fears that we might have about some of this? I've created a Zotero group on the perils of openness. For those of you who have